My name's Sandra Olson. I'm a retired registered nurse and I write books. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about them to see if you might find them interesting. One of my most interesting ones is Murder by Proxy. I worked for a while in a Texas women's prison where I met a nurse who had committed murders on some children in a San Antonio hospital. I never could figure out why in the world she would do such a thing. Later in my career, I met a person with a multiple personality disorder, and this started a gem for the plot of this book. I combined those two characters and made them the antagonist. The methods in this book for how these children were murdered are the methods that this woman actually used. And then, of course, all the rest of it is fiction. But if you like a page-turning novel that's set in a hospital, this one's for you. This novel right here is set in an OB unit. I worked in one for several years at a hospital here in Arkansas. It's about a doctor whose wife died of a rare genetic brain disorder, and now his daughter has the same thing. So he's desperate to find a way to try to save her life. I wrote this back when there was a lot of controversy about stem cell tissue use and embryonic tissue use for operations to try to cure people. This looks at it from both ways, why it might be good and why it might not be. It's a very powerful, moving story, and it has a lot of emphasis on what you would do to try to save someone that you loved. It's about Dr. Franklin and his daughter Elizabeth, and it's a page turner for sure. Connections is a story that I decided I would write after we had lived in Virginia near a snake handling church. And I know that seems like a strange thing for someone to write about, but this actually continues the story of Elizabeth Franklin, who was saved 5 years earlier by her father when she had the corrective brain surgery. It's about a church that's up in the West Virginia mountains where people still are allowed to handle snakes. And the reverend there has decided that he wants the young men to go out and find wives and bring them back. And Elizabeth is one of the women that's kidnapped to be taken there. This story talks a lot about different religions and how families are related and how people have connections from the beginning of their lives till the end of their lives. If you want to find out what happens to Elizabeth, this is the book for you. One of the scariest jobs that I had was being a prison nurse in a Texas women's prison. This story chronicles several things that happened when I was actually working there, but the rest of it is fictional because we didn't have doctors that did the things in real life that happened in this book. Samantha Owens is the one that applies for the job in the prison, and she's the character that I let have all the incidents that happened to me happen to her. It also follows one of the prison inmates there who was incarcerated for writing hot checks. And it doesn't matter how small your crime is. Once you end up in prison, you're mixed in with the women who've committed murders and done all types of horrendous things. So you can follow the story of these two women in this book and just remember, some of it's true, but a lot of it isn't. For a few years, I worked as a nurse in a dialysis unit, and believe me, that was one of the hardest nursing jobs that I ever had. Besides having to take care of patients, you had to take care of the equipment and the water room. All of that's explained in layman's terms in this book so that everyone can understand just what a difficult and dangerous job this can be. But this story is about a nurse by the name of Pat Barker. She's being stalked, and she actually has to leave her position in Massachusetts, and she moves to Arkansas to try to get away from this man. However, he follows her. And then the complications arise as he decides to stalk the head nurse of the dialysis unit. And what he does and how he traps them all and ends up kidnapping her are the basis of this novel. If you want another page turner, this is the one for you. Finding the Lost Ones chronicles the life of Margaret Crane, who does facial reproductions for a police department. When they send her a skull, she can turn it into a photo of the person and what they look like when they're actually alive. It also brings back in a character that I introduced in Toxic Blood. His name is James Ford, and he's a private detective. So he has now got his own series. And it talks a little bit more about him and his family and the people that were introduced in the book Toxic Blood. When Margaret Crane identifies a victim of a man who has kidnapped women and kept them as sex slaves, he then turns her into a target. This has been happening, and we see it in real life, and I've been reading about it on the news and seeing it on television, so it seemed like an apropos topic for a current book. So grab it, people. It's a good one. The Turquoise Cross takes a little bit of a break from the other books that I have been writing about where we have hospital situations. This one takes place in France back in the 1960s. As a teenager, I actually lived in France, and I've set it in the same area where I lived, so the local color is actually what was there. It's a story about a young woman who inherits a castle in France and, of course, then meets her future husband. So it starts out almost like a romance. But there's a nurse in it who is the heroine, and when this woman's children are kidnapped, she's the one that has to save them from being sold on the black market. So although it's a little bit different, there still is a nurse character in it, and it follows along with things that were actually happening in Europe. There's also a mystery in there about what happened to this woman's grandmother and where she went. She disappeared during World War II, and that mystery is also solved. So there you go. That's all the books I've written so far. I hope you like them.